with concurrence by the DNR is required. Any filling or disturbance of the wetlands is subject to DNR approval. Bridget is here to answer any questions related to engineering.
So the primary concerns of the engineering division is that there's a drainage swale through the center of the property that serves the properties to the west as well as some to the north that would need to be considered as part of the stormwater management plan. So they don't have to necessarily detain that water, but they do have to account for it.
Can you describe detain versus account, what that means to the people listening?
Sure. All stormwater management in the city of Mquon needs to go through the Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewage District, and they provide technical guidance on how off-site drainage is accounted for on various sites. So it can either be bypassed or it can be restricted, and by restricted I mean slowed down on the site. Essentially, the applicant has to ensure that there is no additional water leaving the site than there is today. So if they are bypassing that water, they have to slow down the other water. Essentially, everything together can't be more than it is today in any location on the site.
The neighboring concern, and I know they'll have an opportunity to speak here in a second, was that the water patterning as it is right now is accounted for on the downstream properties. You know, when we account for the same amount of water leaving the property, are we also accounting for it leaving in the same place?
Yes.
And not increasing in the same place? I just wanted to give some confirmation and reassurance to those residents that are downstream, especially after this last week's rain.
The requirements are not only for the amount of water for the whole site, but also the locations of where that water is leaving. They can't exceed at any location where it was leaving before. So there is a crossroad culvert under Riverland Road, which is quite substantial. So that's where the majority of the water is going now, and the majority of the water would need to go there with the development.
At the creek?
Yes.
I guess it's a named creek. I learned that this last week. I didn't know it was a named creek until then. And then the swale through the middle. Should we ask for public comment before I get too deep into this, Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Okay, I'll drop it. I got questions for you later.
Okay.
All right, we have a number of people that have registered to speak on this item. I'll go through this. Bruce Ross is opposed, sort of, and wishes to speak. Bruce?
Hi, my name is Bruce Ross. I live at 14038 North Highland Drive, so about 300 yards from the northeast corner of the proposed development. As a county supervisor for the district in which this parcel lies, I have visibility of the county's environmental sensitivity planning tool that considers this parcel within the top 30% of sensitive areas in all of Ozaukee County. So the recovering Milwaukee River, the wetlands that are to the south and to the east, that help mitigate rainwater issues like we've had over the past week. The groundwater recharge area that's to the east that hasn't really been mentioned anywhere, the rise of or the origin of Riverland Creek in this area. All I would ask you to consider the sensitive environmental context of this area outside the lot of the council excuse me, not the council, but in the context of this proposal. I'd like to make 3 points. One, the Bonnie River neighborhood is organized in 6 short days. A large and growing percentage of our neighborhood has reviewed the plan, such as we have received, collectively submitted concerns for your consideration as a part of the agenda package tonight. Right now, we have about 50 signees to that letter. I hope that you have it in your package, that you've had a chance to review it. It's got 14 or so significant, what we consider significant points, some of which probably should be considered now, and I know some of them will be considered downstream, but the collective aspect of it probably warrants some significant consideration. An implicit takeaway of this, I'm not going to go through those 14 points, they'll be covered by others, but an implicit takeaway is that we're actively organized. We formed a steering committee of 10 members to help take input, to consolidate viewpoints, to provide input to you and to the developer, speak with a unified voice. This list is growing. We've only had a few days to get those folks together on this. So we care about the special place, and we want to make first sure our voice is coherent, so that we can speak with a single and unified voice, and then that it's heard. So that's point number one. Point number two would be that this neighborhood is not against the development of a property in accordance with the landowner's rights. We recognize, as special as this property is, that the developer has opportunities, if they own the property, to develop it. This is not another case of NIMBY in my backyard sort of stuff. Our formal list of concerns should not be construed as trying to stop that development, or even necessarily this PUD aspect of the development. We are split as an organization on what the best development methodology would be to protect the important characteristics of this neighborhood. But what we're here to do tonight, and really we've made this offer in the past and we're willing to make the offer in the future, is we just want to help the developer, the city, the future landowners of this property, and of course ourselves, avoid easily foreseeable downstream problems. Some of those are covered under city engineering review, some of those are not. And so point number three would be that we'd like to be a respected partner in this development. It's unexpected, unfortunate, unnecessary, and certainly inefficient for us to have found out only 6 days ago what was considered in this. Having to develop formal input to articulate and share in this formal venue in which you are trying to make a decision on tonight. So it would have been much preferable for us to sit down with the developer and with the city and air the plans and offer our perspective on the development, and to then work with the developer and with the community to develop a consensus that meets the developer's financial considerations. We know the neighborhood, we know where the turkeys cross the road, we know where the coyotes run, we know where the water flows normally, where it flows in significant events like this past week. We can help. We bring that to bear. That's based on hundreds of years of collective residence here. And we have a pretty remarkable collection of members of the Bonnie River community, from farmers to estate owners to small parcel owners to current members of homeowners associations in conservation subdivisions, what works there, what doesn't work there. We have respect, I'm just looking around the audience, we have respected brokers of developments, so we understand the profit motivation and what's necessary to make a development successful. So we bring that to bear, as well as having elected officials in the area and environmental design and restoration professionals. So we think that gives us standing to ask to be a respected partner, not just individuals stepping in front of you to offer our perspective. We recognize there's risks opening that collaboration, but we think that our level of organization and the deep bench strength we bring will help, may make that collaboration a less risky alternative to something adversarial. So in concluding my remarks on this important and sensitive environmental area, I'd say three things. We're organized, we're caring, and we're committed to this neighborhood. We respect the development rights of the landowner, but we're going to continue to advocate for a sensitive development. And we think we can be a positive means to help achieve that goal if the city and the developer fully engage us in that. I know that's maybe a bit Pollyannish, but I think we can help. Engage us, please. Thank you. Good luck in your considerations.
Thank you, Mr. Ross. We have Amy Brager, who is opposed and wishes to speak. Amy?
Hi.
Hi.
My name is Amy Brager, and I live at 13700 North Riverland Road, and I am directly east of this development. So I'm going to, whatever water situation we have, whatever every piece of construction, everything I'm going to be affected by. So one of my biggest concerns is the moving of the water. And according to what's up there, which is the only thing I've seen, apparently there's a little different one, but there's actually a Riverland Creek that runs through two of those center lots. And you can see where the water goes, and then it kind of goes to the left, and then it goes directly in between the Wilkinson's driveway and my driveway. I don't know how those lots would be able to handle that kind of drainage. I feel like we have to consider respecting that part of, it's actually a creek. I don't know if anyone knows that. There's a name to it. So that's a big concern of mine, because if you increase the amount of water going on either side of my property, there's going to be, washout. There's going to be, when they fertilize their lawns, that fertilizing, all of that is now going onto my property, and my property is actually part of the Milwaukee watershed. I don't know if anyone's familiar with that. I have a horse farm. I have two pieces of property, to be honest. But they're next to each other. I have a horse farm, and I'm not even allowed to spread manure because of this. And neither was that farmer, as far as I could tell he was hauling it away. So I feel like there's a big concern with regards to what they can put on their lawns and how it's going to affect all those neighbors on the east side. And especially because I am literally between two waterways. So that's a big concern. A third concern, which is, I don't know how this happened, if it was intentional, if maybe you didn't notice this, but it's completely lined up on the south entrance to my driveway. So on any given Friday or Saturday night, I could have 30-plus headlights coming straight up my driveway and shining right into my house that I purchased over 10 years ago in a rural neighborhood. And I'm very, very upset about that. I don't want 30 headlights coming into my property. It's going to scare my animals. I have horses. They're, very well-trained horses. It's going to be very disruptive to me. I bought a piece of rural property on purpose, and all of a sudden now this is a possibility. So I'm hoping that could be reconsidered. There is plenty of space between myself and south of me, the Brickmans, or between myself and north of me, the Wilkinsons, that if these headlights are coming out, at least it's not shining into someone's house and straight up a driveway. So that's a big concern. I did have a concern with those lots having the trees, but as I understand, there's a new map, so I don't know what that looks like to preserve those trees, but I do know there's a large population of lots of wildlife in there. And lastly, that open land, I have friends that live in conservation neighborhoods, and they say that nobody takes care of that opens. I don't know if that could be.
My husband and I here, and the water that's flowing. We live on the Milwaukee River, and I will say today it is a lot closer to my house than it was about a week and a half ago. The lower part of our lot is in the waterway, and there's about 3 feet of water at any given time with these big rain events. And they're happening more and more. We've been here 15 years, and we're seeing more and more flooding of the river. So these hydrology issues are huge for the neighbors who live across the street. The Bragers, the Wilkinsons, the Hanlons, and the Brickmans all receive water from this parcel. And we need to make sure that if this subdivision goes in, that we are not creating problems for them. And it is also in the Milwaukee River watershed. So all this, talk a little bit about Riverland and the two entrances that this proposed plan has onto Riverland. Riverland and Bonnewell have, I believe, 40 miles per hour speed limits. I walk those roads with my neighbors many times a week with my dogs. People are whizzing by. It is a narrow, rural kind of feel to the road, and we've got now 2 more entrances off that road with people coming on. I think that really has to be looked at. I think that's going to be a danger. There's also a kind of a rise in the road, and I think that's going to create a blind area as people come over the rise down to the area where these entrances are. We did receive input from some people who live in the subdivision to the west. There were trees, evergreen trees planted by the developer along the west side that the developer had mentioned in his plan that he wanted to spade and move throughout the subdivision. The input that we got from these neighbors is we want these trees there as a buffer. We don't want to be looking at this subdivision. These trees have formed a great buffer. Leave them there. Don't move them. Our experience with picking up evergreens and moving them is they don't do well anyway. So leave those trees there would be our recommendation. Lastly, our experience that we've seen in our neighborhood with the conservation subdivisions, while they're great in theory, is that who is responsible for these outlots? In other words, the developer in theory is responsible, and then once you get to a threshold of maybe, 75%, now the homeowners association kicks in, and they're responsible to maintain these outlots. That wooded area, they will find, has specimen trees, has mature hardwoods. Who's going to be maintaining the wetlands and those woodlands? Most of the people that tell me that live in these subdivisions with the HOAs, they don't even know they have HOAs. People don't want to reach in their pocket and put money in. And I will tell you that our neighbors are very, very conscious of invasives. People do a lot of work on their properties to keep out invasives. And we are very concerned about who's going to be doing that. Lastly, I would just say, does the Planning Commission have enough information today to make a decision? And I question whether, with all these concerns, this is ripe for a decision today. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Ross. We have Bob and Joan Biggie, who are opposed and do not wish to speak. Joe and Pat Dabalik do not wish to speak. Kenneth Neig is opposed and does not wish to speak. Stacy Williams is opposed and does not wish to speak. Judy McNabb is opposed and does not wish to speak. Ben Arnold is opposed and does not wish to speak. Terry Wilkinson is opposed, and Terry would like to speak.
Hi, good evening. My wife Kathy and I live just to the east on 32 acres across Riverland Road. As Amy Brager mentioned, that the swale that runs right through the middle of the property abuts goes between our property and Amy's property. When it gets to the other side of the road, there's a large culvert there. We get a tremendous amount of water in there right now. It can be, 20 feet wide and 5 feet deep. It can really pour through there. And I would ask that, I'm not opposed to the development of the property either, but this is very quick, and I think a lot of consideration needs to be given to the drainage here. It's very sensitive. It has a huge impact on our properties, and we ask for thorough consideration of that. Other than that, a lot of us feel that 2 entrances are not needed for a subdivision like this. The other subdivisions in the area only have one. We also feel that the implementation of the conservation subdivisions has not been good. The trails that were agreed to have largely been abandoned. So putting another trail on this is just probably a trail to, nowhere, because even if it connects to the other trails, they've been abandoned. So I think maybe the city should take a look at what's there and see if that, if that can, be resurrected and completed or something like that. We've seen about 3 or 4 of these go up now, conservation subdivisions in the area since we've been there. And I don't feel they're in the character of the area. I question whether this couldn't be just divided into 6 or 7 parcels with some of the, with 6 or 7 driveways and houses facing Riverland Road, which is much more in character with the area. To think that we, bought a 33-acre parcel and we look at our front door and see the backs of everybody's houses or sides, and, it just isn't, it hasn't, the subdivisions haven't necessarily really improved the appearance of the area. The lots have not sold fast. Some of them have been kind of downgraded in terms of what was expected with the houses over time. So we're also concerned about the impact of the of the subdivision on our housing values. So I guess all in all, we asked. I feel this is very quick. I think this should be tabled until more consideration can be given and a better plan can be put forward. We feel that this is a very sensitive neighborhood environmentally, and a lot of planning needs to be given to this before it's pushed through. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Wilkinson. Kathy Wilkinson is opposed, does not wish to speak. Those are all the names I have. Is there anyone else who wishes to address the commission on this item? Yes, ma'am. Come up.
Hi there. My name is Stacy Williams Ung. It's a Chinese name. I said I didn't wish to speak, but I would like to echo my neighbors. I live about 200 yards from the northeastern corner of where this is proposed to be located. I agree with Mr. and Mrs. Ross that, I certainly want to echo their sentiments that we are united in our feelings, but I would say we're a complex group. And so, as such, we have gray area. There's a gradient here on how opposed we are, and I would certainly put myself on the far end of being completely opposed. My neighbors have been very kind and generous to say, we understand that you want to develop the land, we understand that there's an opportunity to make money and all of that, but there are plenty of us who want that to be grass and feel strongly about that. So there's definitely a feeling that, at least on my part, our neighborhood does have a character of being ecological and being very proud of the natural and rural character. And the best way to preserve the natural and rural character of the land is to do so. Thank you.
Thank you.
Here, I would like to I did sign off saying I didn't want to speak, but I changed my mind. My name is Ben Arnold. 2 of you know me. The sentiment has been echoed by a couple of people about invasive plants. And in terms of a conservation subdivision with common areas that also were mentioned, no responsibility to take care of them, I don't think it's just for the planning department to approve a conservation subdivision without having a weed ordinance that's upgraded to include all the invasive things that are in Mquon now. It's kind of contradictory. Conserving what? Areas for invasive plants to grow. That's what you're conserving with these common areas. That's all I want to say. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Arnold. The conservation design, the intent of it is to protect sensitive environmental areas. Like in this case, we have wetlands and we have woodlands. And so the conservation design is intended to protect those pieces of the land intact, as opposed to dividing them up and putting them on somebody's private property. And the people that own private properties, they can clear invasive species from their property, or they can choose not to do that. And ideally, and I suppose ideally is the key word here, ideally, when you have a conservation subdivision, the open space is managed to the extent where invasives and noxious weeds, et cetera, are controlled. And I say ideally, that's the intent behind the ordinance. What's before us tonight here is a concept plan. Okay, so they haven't gone real far in designing this subdivision. It's a concept. And they want to rezone it to do a conservation subdivision as opposed to building 5-acre estate lots, which they have every right to do without our express approval. They have the right to do that. They could divide this into 13 parcels with driveways, and it would be all over. So the conservation design provides all of us with an opportunity to make this a better place. And that's why the developer, who is a longtime Mquon resident, that's why he is proposing to do it this way. So what happens tonight is we look at the concept design, we look at the rezoning request to make it a conservation subdivision, and then the Planning Commission makes a recommendation to the Common Council. Common Council is the one that actually rezones the property to enable a conservation subdivision. That will happen. Public hearing would be November, I believe. There'll be a reading in October, and then there'll be a public hearing, an official public hearing in November, and then theoretically a decision by the Common Council in November. So that's the process that is followed here. Following all those comments, I'd like to go to the applicant, Mr. Affelbach, and the floor is yours, Paul, whatever you'd like to cover.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Planning Commissioners and Jack and Papula, for all the work that's gone into this so far. A lot of what I was going to say has been covered here, and thank you, Mayor, for your summary right there. That was very good and helpful. I'll try to skip through this and not take too much time. Again, I'm Paul Apfelbach. I'm working with Oyvind Solvang, who owns Hillcrest Builders. Oyvind is also a Mquon resident. He has a contract to purchase this land from the Fillinger family, and Oyvind got called away at a very last-minute conflict, so he couldn't be here. The three areas I'd like to just touch upon briefly are what went into this process to get us where we are today. A couple of comments on the staff report, and then address some of the neighbor concerns. With respect to the neighbors, in the beginning of this process, it was mentioned that I wanted to do 19 lots here, not 13. So starting several months ago, I met most of these neighbors and heard pretty much the same concerns as they talked the Park and Open Space Committee out of not recommending 19 lots for this site, which is what got me to the proposal here for 13 lots. Bruce mentioned that they've been working on this for 6 days, but immediately after that meeting, I did contact him, tell him we weren't pursuing the 19 lots, and told him that we would be coming forward with 13 lots. So this really isn't new news. The actual layout is similar, but there has been some communication with neighbors. What I'd like to point out about the property is not only are there the beautiful features of the beginnings of the creek, but also I've had discussions with the city forester, Mike Geese, about the woodlands. And he impressed upon me that it is a much more sensitive and beautiful area than I had thought. It's not a bunch of dying ash trees. So I immediately went forward and revised the plan, which I believe you have, and have taken all of the lot areas out of the woods. I think the mayor made a good point that I did decide to pursue a conservation subdivision, partially at the urging of city staff. They felt, or I felt that they felt that this was a better route to go, considering the comments that we had heard at the Park and Open Space meeting. The other concerns that we've heard about flooding and so on, I can't emphasize enough how comprehensive the review is by the engineering staff, the DNR and MMSD in terms of reviewing the grading and the water collection. I mean, it's an amazing process that doesn't happen by accident. And I would venture to guess that the water quality of this site post-development is going to be better than that of a tilled farm field. Not only because of the erosion that occurs if it rains like crazy when the field's been tilled, but because of even ag use chemicals and silt and all the rest of it that can happen without any ponds or without any engineering that's gone into the water quality. So I just respectfully ask you to give serious thought and consideration to what's already happened here with going through the efforts of a 13-acre lot conservation subdivision, removing the lots from the woods, not filling any wetlands, not encroaching on the beginnings of the creek in the south side, and working around, pretty much putting the lots only where the field is currently tilled. So we aren't encroaching on what I would consider to be super environmentally sensitive areas. Although, don't get me wrong, I believe with the proximity to the river that all of this area is sensitive compared to maybe out on Wasaki Road or something where there isn't a watershed issue. Regarding the staff report, there were 3 major recommendations they made that were not included in this plan. The first one I've addressed, and that's we've taken the lots away from the trees. The second one was lot sizing and clustering. They'd like to see 3 or 4 lots together and then a break in the lots. As we have it now, I have 4 lots in the south, 3 in the middle of the road, and then there's 6 wrapped around the northwest corner there. I think that if we had to, while I'd prefer to go with this hybrid approach that they suggested in the write-up, if we had to, we could go ahead and create a gap between some of the lots. Again, I'd prefer not to, just because I feel it's designed beautifully the way it is. That's what I do, and that's why I did it this way. But we could accommodate some more clustering. In terms of the lot sizes, I felt, and I've heard from other builders, that it's nice to have a little more room for a mound system. Provides more flexibility to get it away from the house, actually then provides a little more area for mound systems, and it doesn't overly enlarge the lots. If we had to have a hard and fast rule here tonight that we need to have a certain percentage of open space and the lots had to average a certain size and they couldn't be greater than or less than certain sizes, I mean, I'm here to work with the city, not draw a line in the sand and say, what we've got here is the final answer. If you look at this subdivision, we could cut a little distant, the back edges off of some of the lots. We'd statistically meet some different ratios and average lot sizes and things. But again, this is me putting forth my best judgment, what I've heard about the market and what I've heard about smaller lots in rural areas. We especially thought the lot sizes we've suggested are appropriate, considering immediately to the west, the Hidden Farms lots are straight 2.5 acre size lots or bigger. That zoning was not a PUD. So the lots to the immediate west are larger. The third item that was mentioned was the paths. Now, since the report was written, it's come to my attention that the Hidden Farms property just to the west has a path that they've not maintained for 15 years because it didn't go anywhere. We have no problem connecting to that path if it's there, and Papula could speak to that. if that needs to be a paved bike path that comes from the west, it could go up through the pine trees and connect to the new road through the gap shown between the lots there. Or we could modify a lot size to create an area for that. Within the rest of the site, I think it would have to be restricted to a walking path. I had a specific conversation with Mike Geese about that today, and he felt that the ecosystem and the nature of the trees up there, he would be very much opposed, and I guess therefore I'm opposed anyway, of adding too much paved path to the property, and especially through the woods. He thought that should be a passive path and should not allow any vehicular type vehicles or anything through the woods. But we had fully in plan to have a private path that would go around the north perimeter and through the woods. And we had no intention of building bridges or filling wetlands or anything for paths. A final comment about the staff report relates to the acceleration and deceleration lanes and the bypass lanes on Riverland. The neighbors were basically opposed to that. I did speak to Bridget about it, and she said that there's really no choice about acceleration and deceleration lanes. I guess I would raise that as a question, if there's any choice of not having those. And I would hope we could build Riverland Road and these two entries without a third bypass lane, which would be on the east side of the property. And looking at Google Maps, you could see that all the subdivisions to the west that enter and exit off Bonnewell don't have acceleration or deceleration lanes. They add asphalt, more impervious, and really aren't the nature of the area to create that kind of entry. I know that staff replied to the neighbors' concerns, so I've got 3 pages of my reply to the neighbor concerns, but I'm going to defer. I didn't see what the staff replied. I'm not going to go through all of these things, other than a general comment that with respect to homeowners associations, I have not had the same experience that they've had with everything, going to pieces once the developer leaves. I spent most of my time living in Mquon, in the oldest conservation subdivision, I think, in town, which is over at Ferry Chasm. And we routinely had Labor Day and other group community events to clear garlic mustard and buckthorn and so on. I think when you get owners at this caliber in these subdivisions, there's owner pride and there's owner interest in maintaining the values of the property. Another subdivision I built was Essex Place. That's got tremendous amount of open space between the buildings. And I know they've taken a great deal of effort in maintaining a prairie-type feel to their spaces. And as you drive through there now, and it's been 20 years, it's still beautiful with grasses between the buildings. I think the city and the planning and the developers' involvement in all of this it's very deliberate. It's extensive, and it's a comprehensive review of all these issues as we go from the concept plan that we have here through the rezoning, and then the implementation of things like stormwater management and open space plans, landscape plans, and things like that. With that said, I'm not going to go through my list of 14 points. I'll spare all of you that, but I would love to be able to answer any questions that you have or concerns about what we're proposing here. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. I'll start with one. The road design, where you have 2 entrances to the subdivision, do you give any thought to having simply one? And if you're going to have 2, can they be moved so that you don't end up facing Ms. Brager's driveway?
I think the one to the south across from the Brager driveway could be jogged further to the south, and it wouldn't line up directly. I think that the plan was put together the way it is because that's, I think the way planning and engineering would like to see it, and the way the civil engineer that designed it put it based on sort of rules of thumb for designing where roads intersect. I think you could save us a lot of money by only having one entry road because of acceleration and deceleration lanes and cost of merging into the road. I think that the site, the purpose of the two entries was probably, as I recall, came from a staff recommendation. And it is possible that this subdivision could be substantially the same with one entry point with the road curving all the way around to a cul-de-sac.
So my question, could you do that? And the answer is yes?
I think the answer is probably yes. If you give us, the leeway to have pie-shaped lots and some other things like that that work around a cul-de-sac and have plenty of area.
Okay. Fair enough. We have a good staff, but we don't always agree on everything.
That's okay.
Yeah. Okay. Commissioners? Commissioner Strongheart?
Hey, go figure. I was at a meeting last Thursday night with the group that came forward in opposition, and again, I do want to reiterate what was said earlier. They're not trying to stop the subdivision from going in, but they're just really highlighting the things that have been very important in the area all along. The key critical things being, A, the environment, B, the drainage, and then, C, that road that goes into Ms. Brager's front yard. Another thing that was addressed, that wasn't addressed tonight, is that as you're showing lots 12 and 13, and I'd also ask that staff, we got a new printout of the sheet. Can you put that on board where it's showing that the lots currently as are sitting in front of us aren't showing going into the woods?
We don't have that electronically. This was provided after the packet. We do have copies if they want to see it.
Yeah, I mean, if we've got extra copies that we can just kind of circulate through. Basically what it is showing pretty much the exact same layout, but they did, the wood line was preserved. So again, I live, just for the record, I live just west in Hidden Farm. Yes, there is a path that goes to the pond that's kind of just barely viewable there. No, it hasn't been maintained, and I think the main reason it hasn't been maintained is because Country Breeze, it was supposed to connect to Country Breeze, which is a subdivision south of us, and they never put in a pathway system there. So if we're going to do something uniformly with our subdivision and this new proposed one, we should also, just kind of look into that and make sure that we're doing this as a synergist unit as was intended. If not, maybe we don't connect them. I would recommend that you come maybe chat with me, and I'll chat with my neighbors and see what's preferred by all parties and or staff, and I can provide feedback here as well. The drainage swale that's shown in the middle of the property that goes in between the Wilkinsons and the Brager property, you've got lots 12 and 13 shown there. I'm concerned with how you're going to put a house on, especially lot 13, without impeding that water from going through and draining properly, or diverting, or doing something different with that.
I would think that is done with a properly sized culvert over lot 13, and that lot 12 the entryway would be from the west.
So you'd culvert the entire lot?
No, just at the driveway for lot 13, and you'd leave the swale in place. I don't see there being any material grading done in that swale. That's pretty much going to be left natural.
Yeah, and that's, as they're stating, I have seen water flow pretty heavily through that in a rain event, especially like we've had this last week. I just want to make sure,
This summer, I drove across it a few times, and there was no water, but all bets are off with what's happened the last 2 weeks.
yeah,
I'm
and
sure there's a lot of water in there.
it is uncommon for spring and fall to have, heavy rainfalls that do that. I mean,
Those calculations would be done, and culverts can be sized and oversized. In the worst-case scenario, the culvert doesn't handle it and the water goes over the driveway.
okay.
But it wouldn't, for that reason, you'd be oversizing that culvert.
Bridget's got her hand up.
So the culverts would be required to be sized for the 100-year storm event, and they would have to show an emergency overflow path for anything beyond a 100-year storm event. So if we got a larger event, the water would need to safely pass through the site without flooding homes.
Would there be a drainage easement there?
Yes.
They would need DNR approval.
Yeah,
Correct.
and DNR approval, okay. I agree, just talk about, because I was part of the meeting, I know there's a lot of points that they want me to make sure that I address. I agree with no paths in the woods unless you just put a simple walking path with chips, chips that don't have buckthorn seeds in them ideally. We were required in our subdivision to put in a paved path in our woods, and it's been nothing more than just opening the tree canopy to buckthorn, and it's so thick the kids can't even get back there anymore. So we as a neighborhood need to do the clean out, on that. I do recommend, and I agree with the mayor on, that we should consider the northernmost entrance, and then I would be definitely open to a cul-de-sac. I think it's fitting with the neighboring subdivisions. I think, mine's got 2 cul-de-sacs with a single entry. Country Breeze has a single cul-de-sac, and then also the next, the Uplands to the west of us also has a single cul-de-sac, and I don't think that would be anything different than fitting for the area. If the subdivision was bigger than 13 lots, I would definitely agree with the staff recommendation for 2 entries, but at 13 lots, I think 1 entry would be sufficient, and I would, recommend the northernmost one. I drove by there again today. I kind of paused for a little bit in the road. It's at a better spot in the road. Headlights wouldn't hit the residents. It hits kind of a wooded area, where that looks like it's being shown. If necessary, maybe just kind of look at that, shift it a little bit, south if you think that residents would be affected, but I'd be open to the one there as well. And then I'll let my fellow commissioners say a couple more things as I kind of go through and make sure I've got everything covered. Oh, the trees. You're talking about spading some of those pine trees. I know that the Hidden Farm subdivision, the HOA has reached out to me as their neighbor and their alderman, and saying that they're preferring to keep it. How many would you be considering moving from there?
I haven't counted them, but there's got to be over 1,000 trees there.
Okay.
They're planted at least 12 to 15 years ago. I spoke with the Fillingers about that process. One of the, Ryan Fillinger was involved in doing that with his father.
Right.
They're getting to the point right now that they're very close together. And within 5 years, those trees are going to be too close together. So to thin out half of those trees would do nothing to obstruct the buffer that they're going to create as they get taller. I mean, if you look at this picture carefully, you can see there's about 15 rows of trees there. It's just unbelievable how many trees are in there. And my experience in tree spading trees, I've tree spaded 200 trees over the past 20 years, and I can't think of any that I've lost. That's all of Essex Place, Hidden Creek, Heron Pond. They're all tree spaded in there. The pines that came from the Hadler Nursery on Wauwatosa Road, they don't die.
Okay. I guess that I just, a gentleman's request as a neighbor, that's at least maintained as a buffer and that,
That's a mutual goal, I believe, is to have as thick a buffer as possible there.
Okay.
There's the power lines is the major problem, and
Yeah.
the existence of all those trees will provide something else to look at than the power lines. There are so many trees there. I'd encourage you to walk back there, and you'll see that it's even very unhealthy for the trees. They get mold and things as they get too close together and don't get ventilation and so on. So I talked to Mike Geese about that this afternoon.
Yeah, and I heard Bridget mention that, that's something that's definitely that he's comfortable with, so, perfect. I was in there this spring, my grill cover flew over there with the winds, so, I think that's all I got for right now.
Mr. Schaefer?
I have two questions, and then I have to noodle before I'm going to raise my hand again. Under the existing zoning, do we know what the lot yield would be? Then so let's say, this is more for the neighbor. Oh, for Pete's sake. I'm pretty loud as it is, I don't know. Under the existing zoning, if we changed nothing, if no one was here proposing anything, and the Fillinger family sold it and it was developed, how many lots could there be there? 5-acre minimum.
13 lots, and that's
So no
shown
matter
on the
what, it
plan.
could be 13.
Yep, and it's 13 lots, including, again, the wetlands and wooded areas. They would
Yep.
yield out at 5-acre minimum lots, meeting all the lot width and depth requirements of the R1 district.
And staying out, and in that case, you're saying some of the lots would have,
Yep, would contain the wooded areas and the wetlands.
right. So I just think that's helpful to know as a I'll get into my own deja vu about this in a minute, but my second question, I keep hearing this Milwaukee River watershed. Maybe this is a Bridget question. I need to understand this a little bit more. Is this an official designation? I'm hoping to understand.
Technically, this parcel is part of the Milwaukee River watershed as well, because the drainage from this parcel goes to the Milwaukee River. That's essentially how a watershed is defined, is the water that goes to the river is the watershed. So there are currently some regulations that are in the works for the Milwaukee River to help clean it up. They're called the total maximum daily loads. This is something you'll hear more and more about as those requirements are developed, and it is intended to help clean the Milwaukee River. So there is a level of sensitivity when you talk about the Milwaukee River watershed and the sediment and other things that are going to it.
Pesticides,
So
fertilizer on lawns, all of that.
Stormwater management does take into consideration things like the total suspended solids, which is called TSS, and the water quality, as well as the water quantity. So some of that is already covered by our stormwater regulations, but not all of it, because the TMDLs haven't been fully vetted yet.
So any of the properties right now adjoining the river, as well as, I don't know, our neighborhood drains into the river. Are we considered watershed?
Yes. So Mquon has two main river watersheds, the Menominee River and the Milwaukee River. So everybody is in a watershed, no matter where you are in the city.
Okay.
It just depends on which
Okay.
which watershed you drain to.
Okay, thanks, that's helpful. Now I have to noodle.
Mr. Parrish?
All right, good evening. Thanks to everyone in the audience and the developer for their project presentation. Just wrote a bunch of notes since this is primarily a concept review, so I wanted to give you feedback on your concept. As far as the rezoning to what you're proposing, essentially a PUD, I'd be okay with that concept. I'm okay with one entrance. I think that seems to be a consensus among many people here. The landscaping on lots 4 through 7 in the back, I think we touched on that with all the trees. You don't need landscaping. We just want to make sure that the trees are providing the proper screening. So I have not personally walked back there. I did take a drive around the entire site and didn't happen to see the tree farm back there. So I really like that. Well, let me go back. The lots 12 and 13. That swale going through them, it seems like the actual location of the house is going to end up kind of being in an odd location on the lot, and I just question the placement of lots 12 and 13, and since this is a concept and we might end up with only one entrance here, it might make sense to be more sensitive to that swale running across the property. I guess I want to not remind the neighborhood, but I'm very pleased this isn't a TDR project where you were going to end up with 19 homes. That would have been horrible for you. I do sympathize with you quite a bit here. However, it is zoned. I mean, someone could come and develop 13 lots here, and I believe in that case there wouldn't be retention ponds. Is that correct?
Oh, there would.
If you broke this up into 13 individual lots with 13 driveways, there would not be retention ponds or any of that. There's no stormwater management,
There would still be stormwater management
Okay.
required.
but no retention ponds, or?
Still with,
Okay,
it
good.
could be ponds or it could be other types of stormwater, they call them best management practices or BMPs.
So there'd be still those 2 ponds serving all the individual lots? Okay.
Yes.
Okay with moving the south roadway, and those were my comments. With conditional uses, I think the law changed, right, Jack, where you can't, we can't. This is the rezoning. Rezoning, okay. Okay.
Mr. Lemke.
I think, agree with a lot of the things that have been said. My only different comment would be that I fully support the conservation idea. A lot of the people said the outlots, can turn into weeds. Chop this up into 13 individual lots, and I guarantee you 10 of those 13 are going to let acres go wild. They'll just let them go. So I think you've got a better chance at having those outlots kept up in the conservation idea than if you just chop it up.
Definitely.
Bridget, acceleration, deacceleration, and bypass lanes, are those part of our standard specifications?
They are part of the standard specifications. It is common that developers do not want to put them in. They come up quite regularly with just about every subdivision. The purpose of acceleration and deceleration lanes and bypass lanes is really traffic safety, especially since we're talking about a 40-mile-per-hour roadway. Having safe refuge for traffic that isn't turning into the subdivision or leaving the subdivision is a safety factor. So staff would recommend the acceleration, deceleration lanes, and the bypass lane.
And do we have any authority to waive any of those requirements?
In the past, Planning Commission has waived the bypass lane, but has not waived the acceleration and deceleration lanes.
I'd be open to waiving the bypass lane based on neighbor input and what the developer would like to do. And safety, obviously, is key number one.
Right. Any other comments? One other question. If we ask for a single entrance subdivision, that will change the design and the layout of the road network and some of the lots. So do we table this, or do we approve it and expect to see that design come back?
It depends how comfortable you are. You have 2 options. You could table it and bring it back. Either way, the first reading won't be until October at the council meeting, but by approving it, at least gives us the ability to start the reports for the council meeting. Tabling it then might push it another month.
Gotcha.
So you could approve it, but want to see the changes made before it goes on to council.
Okay.
Is the developer okay if we would put it out a month? I mean, I'd really like a chance to work with you and then maybe be a liaison between you and the neighbors and just see if we can get a little more
actually
support
started
for you.
working on this project practically last October, and because of park and open space and TDR and a variety of other things,
TDR wasn't appropriate, and I'll
Right.
stop you short there.
No, I agree, but we didn't know that at the time.
Yeah.
So I would prefer to try to, in good faith, come back with something that shows I believe we can put a cul-de-sac by lot 1 and 13, probably affects lot 12, 13, 1 and 2. There'd be a bulb down there with lots around it. Wouldn't change the lot count or the lot sizes.
No, that would be fine. I'd prefer just to keep as much of that buffer as you can in between Riverland and so they're not looking at, immediately on people's backyards. You did a really nice job with the buffering. Usually I look at these and they're like, the buffering's really lean in one direction versus another, and you did a really nice job on this, so I would encourage you to maintain that in a future design. And we'd love to save you the money on the extra entrance, so.
We'll get to spend it somewhere, I'm sure.
Maybe on prairie restoration. That would be cool.
Mr. Chorn?
You know, there's been so many suggested changes. You know, the two approaches would be to table it to see what you come back with, or pass it on expecting to see the changes. What vehicle do we have to, if we're not pleased with what comes back?
Well,
We go to the Common Council the first week of October, and no action is actually taken until the first week of November.
we
So
could
that-
have this come back to the Planning Commission in October.
You can't have it come back, correct. The hard part is, the difficulty for the process would be is that in order, we have to get our reports done for councils, even though it's a first reading, there's no action, we have to get our reports done prior to the planning commission meeting, so it's difficult to us to address the changes being made as acceptable since you haven't seen them by the time the report is done. So that's the only difficulty, and that's why we've kind of gone away from doing the first reading, the same meeting as the planning commission hearing.
I'm going to make a motion to table. I just think it's appropriate with the amount of changes that we're offering and then what's needed to be done.
I'll second.
We have a motion to table, call the roll.
I'll give you a break. Commissioner Chorin,
Aye.
Commissioner Holly,
Aye.
Commissioner Parrish,
Aye.
Commissioner Lemke,
Aye.
Commissioner Jim Schaefer,
Aye.
Commissioner Becky Schaefer, Alderman Strelcheck,
Aye.
Mayor Abendroth.
No.
Vote passes 7-1.
Okay, this item is tabled, but you understand that
Yes.
we support your project if you change it as we've discussed.
Thank you, and perhaps we could revisit this at Planning Commission in the October meeting and still hit the first reading on Common Council for October. I don't know if that's possible, but I hate to put a break the policy, but
It is possible, there's nothing preventing us from doing that, it just becomes, again, we'll have to generate our staff report prior to the planning commission meeting and seeing the review of the new design. We would have to, I guess, worst case scenario, between first reading and second reading, we would have to alter that report to make any changes based on the feedback from the commission. So, I mean, we can do it, but it's totally up to you.
Yeah, it's okay to try and do that, and because if we end up not liking it, then it will get tabled once again, and then the
Right.
council will wait another month to
Or
get,
it'll get denied, and then it'll go to council with probably less likelihood
and
of
then
passing.
they'll table it and wait for it to come back again.
Right.
So if you can get it done, you can get it done.
well, I appreciate working with everybody, so
Yeah.
we'll do what we can.
So we'll maintain the November deadline or meeting date for the public hearing, just so all
The
the
best we can.
That'd be
residents.
great, if
Okay.
we can do that.
Yep,
Thank
that's
you.
fine.
Thank you, Mr. Alphabach, thank you. We take a short break, let these people leave.
We take a break.
How long, how short? Use the restroom short?
I'd be for that.
I don't get why there's 14 individual lots. I thought they don't need retention. They just go break them off as. I know why, because they'd have to get a CSM approved, that's what we would have a chance to.
I have friends who live way in the west end of Mquon. I forget. 5 acres. It's over 10 acres.
Oh, yeah. Drive down, like, Pleasant Valley Road in Germantown, they just kept chopping off 5 or 10 acre lots right along the road. Everybody built their houses like 5 acres back.
Girls' home.
The first 4 acres are just all buckthorn, and nobody took care of it. 5 acres is a lot of land.
12 acres. That just went to buckthorn.
Yeah.
Now it's coming in. Cut it about every other year. Every year.
Yeah. I just hope we don't scare developers away from the conservation laws. That it seems like the last couple of years. Cop off the 5 acres, you know, they don't have to come in front of this, you don't have to deal with the neighbors. you
I'd
don't
be
have to do
more
anything.
comfortable with this. This was an outlaw.
What did you say, the
Right
driveway?
through here, that swale.
Oh, there's an outlaw?
Because these guys will drive in here and eventually they'll fill it. They don't like the water there, so they fill it.
Bill is gone.
So just because I leave?
Oh,
I don't think so.
we had a couple of meetings. This is better.
There's something about white bread.
For my back problem.
Like Cafe Holland.
You taking any cold biking trips lately?
Not since we did 100.
Not that far either, and I shouldn't.
I always thought it was going to be painted. When I approved it, I should have asked the question.
About a year ago, I was getting ready.
Well, I got white brick on my house, but it is painted.
Shit, now I'm going to Sorry.
It's, no, it's Chicago pink and it's painted white. It's painted white when they bought it. Matter of fact, I only had it painted once since then.
Oh, your bricks right.
My what?
Should have asked the color of your bricks.
I don't care.
It's not really.
I like it if it's painted, but if it's like glazed white brick, it's awful. It looks like tile. I've ridden up that road lately, since I haven't gone to the brush yard.
For now.
That's since my neighbor decided to have a burn pile. The trouble is, the burn pile turned out to be mostly on my property. But I can't.
Ask him for it?
Burn or brown?
Burn, B-U-R-N. He said, I'm going to put a burn pile. I said, yeah, fine. Oh, it kind of crept over. And then the brush gets...
Social hour.
well, nobody goes out. Can't see it, there's trees.
Last minute. Yeah, we didn't have time.
So Dan, are the remaining ones less?
That's that.
Are the remaining items a little less contentious?
It's up to you. At least there's not a whole lot of people.
I have one back here. You have
No, but I feel like everything they were saying, I was so single sitting in those seats when white people were trying to develop. I actually like the 200. It doesn't feel like it.
You guys were
think it should be moved a little bit, but
What was that? Where's that subject?
I mean, what else are they? That's the. I think this is a great use for it. I tried that before it turns. I'm not on the planning commission. We know who you are. I do feel like
I was on for 3 years, 20 years ago. Yeah.
Oh, this was like if I had 4 years, 2014, I think is so they're developing. He's doing 5 homes.
Yeah, I was on.
There's supposed to be 26 homes with sort of, it was just such a, it was so.
That's how Becky's here. She was the first one.
Oh, really? You were the point person?
No, well, there was a lot of them, but
She was the one that I
talked a lot. Shocking.
I don't think
Okay, let's get back to our agenda, and item 4A, Bergen's Partners. The applicant is seeking building and site plan and certified survey map approval for the construction of two 38,000 square foot single-story multi-tenant office buildings to be located at 12100 North Corporate Parkway in the East Mquon Corporate Center.
The proposed buildings will be located on separate parcels. The applicant has indicated that the use is contemplated to be office, and the will be constructed in 2 phases. Phase 1 is the property to the north, including a shared access drive and the plaza, and then Phase 2 includes the building and site to the south. The proposed site plan for the development shows 3 access drives from Corporate Parkway. The center driveway, as I mentioned, will be on both parcels and will be shared by both properties. There are 189 parking stalls proposed for each of the property, which meet the parking requirements for the proposed office use. The applicant is requesting 9 by 18-foot parking stalls. The Planning Commission has the authority to waive the dimensional requirements for stalls, and they have approved 9-foot width parking stalls for similar developments in the past. The proposed buildings meet the setback and offset requirements. The parking lot meets the setback and offset requirements with the exception of the shared driveway, which results in a 0-foot offset. The Planning Commission has the authority to waive parking offset requirements. Staff does support the waiver since the parking areas don't meet the setback due to the shared access. As a condition of approval, staff is requiring a shared access agreement to be approved by the city attorney prior to recording of the CSM. And the open space and FAR were calculated for each parcel separately, and both meet the requirements for the district. The proposed single-story structures are identical in design. The flat roof, combined with the use of the light and dark brick, and the metal panels and the wood tone siding do provide a contemporary look. Let me just get to that rendering here. The buildings are shown to be constructed of brick with the primary and secondary tower entrance elements on the east and west elevations. The north and south elevations will be constructed of light and dark brick, and storefront glazing is proposed at grade level along all the elevations. Dark metal panels are used on the 2 entryway tower elements with a wood tone siding proposed for the interior walls of the entryway. And dark gray brick is inset in 2 areas in between the entryways to break up the facade. The rooftop mechanicals are screened by a tower element on the main entrance, which is carried throughout the building. The secondary entrance has a shorter tower element, which is not carried through the building, but they are screening the rooftop mechanicals with the same metal panel material. Staff did meet with the applicant along with Commissioner Jim Schaefer to address concerns regarding the building designs, and the applicant has worked to overcome those concerns, so staff does support the design and materials of the proposed buildings that we see before us today. Staff supports the proposed landscape plan, which meets the 30% parking lot shading requirements and the street tree requirements. A parking lot lighting plan was submitted and shows 11 parking lot poles on each of the sites. The parking lot poles meet the 16-foot height requirements, and all lighting on the site shall be full cut off, and they'll have to submit a final lighting plan with dispersion plans and fixture cut sheets to staff for approval. Wetlands do appear to be on site, and a wetland delineation report with concurrence from the DNR will be required. If the applicant does intend to fill in the wetlands, and they will also require approval from the DNR. Staff does recommend approval of the building and site plan and CSM subject to the conditions in the report.
Thank you, Papula. Go to the applicant. If you have anything you want to present or add, introduce yourselves to us.
Sure. I'm Karen Sensky, and this is my colleague Rob Oldenburg, both from Ergens in Milwaukee. Papula did such a nice job, so I probably don't have too much more to add, but just had a couple of things to let you know about the project. And we'll do it this way. Just to give everybody who's not exactly familiar with the project a proximity here, this is the last remaining land in what's called the East Mquon Corporate Center. The parcel is about 8.8 acres, and as Papula mentioned, it would be our intention to, via a certified survey map, split that approximately in half to create a north parcel and a south parcel. Obviously, it's just west of I-43 with building frontage on that, and then east of Port Washington Road, north of Mquon Road. This is the site plan again. Our intention is to have approval for the entire site plan, but we would begin with construction of the north phase. Both phases can work independently, so the ponds are not connected. As Papula mentioned, right now it's designed as two twin or actually mirrored buildings with a shared outdoor plaza that separate them. So the property line would run through the middle of that central access drive and through the middle of that shared plaza. Both parcels meet the 5 per 1,000 parking ratio that's required. And there again is a view of the entire site plan. Again, some entry views. So this is looking east. This is the view from I-43. And then a view from the parking where you can see there's a main entry, which is on the south side, and then a secondary entry on the north side, which could become an exclusive entrance for a tenant, depending how everything lays out. This is just a conceptual floor plan, again, a single floor plan building. There's a main lobby area that comes in from that main entrance on the south with shared restrooms. And then there is a corridor shown right now running north to south, but again, depending how tenants lay out, there may or may not be a need for that corridor. Just wanted to share with you some of the details we're planning because this truly is a Class A building, which we think and hope is in high demand in this particular area. As I've mentioned, there's Interstate 43 visibility with the opportunity for on-building signage. We also have large contiguous floor plates to accommodate some large tenants. Reiterating the high parking ratio at 5 spaces per 1,000, which is in high demand from the tenants we've spoken to. There's convenient proximity and access to I-43 via that full interchange at Mquon Road, and of course that means great access to downtown, to and from downtown. A particularly attractive central location, which allows for connectivity to all the destinations and amenities in the area. There could be a common area conference room in the building, depending on, again, what our prospective tenants require. Common restrooms with lockers and showers. We know that there are many people in the area that like to bike to work or walk over the lunch hour. The shared outdoor plaza between the buildings that I mentioned. Building flexibility, just meaning that floor plan can be laid out several different ways. And then this is truly a Class A building with some quality commercial construction. I do, by the way, we have the materials board here if anybody wants to take a closer look. So just to summarize, we're looking for approval of the site plan in total, which would include phased construction of 2 single-story Class A office buildings. We would be dividing the site into 2 parcels via a certified survey map before we begin, and there would be a cross-access easement between the 2 parcels. And then, as Papula mentioned, we're looking for a waiver for the parking setbacks in the middle of the site.
Mr. Schaefer?
Hi. Initially, they had come to the staff, and staff looked at it, and I looked at it, and the owner wanted a very contemporary building, but we thought it was just a little too austere, and it needed a little more articulation or a little something to break up that long band of windows. We didn't want to tell them what to do, but initially, we also did not like the north and south elevation, the end elevations, because they were radically different than the front and back elevations. So they came back with this design, which I was very happy with. I thought it looked a lot better. What we have in the packet isn't a really particularly good idea of what it looks like. If you look at that rendering, it's much better. And we think it'll be a nice addition to the area.
Absolutely. Commissioner Strauss?
I really like what you did with the plan. I think the buildings look great. One of the things is we're backing up against I-43 is I also look to see where your trash receptacles go. Because I think in Mquon, a lot of times we're looking at trash receptacles from I-43, and that's kind of like everyone's driving by view of our city, and I see that you have those on the north side, which I'm really pleased to see that you had that in your plan. I'm supportive of this, and unless I hear something that stands out, I'll be voting in favor of it tonight.
Sure.
I had also questioned the dumpster or the trash, and I don't recall seeing it on the plan where it is.
I squinted. It's really small, and it's on the north.
Okay.
On page 67.
Okay, okay, all right.
And then the same
Yeah.
on the south.
Yeah. And the tower elements, is that a raised lobby area
It is.
in,
Inside, yes, it is.
okay.
So that the
that's-
light would go all the way up to the top.
All right. And isn't there a raised element to the north then also? There's two components that are raised in each of the buildings, right?
On the interior, on the north side would not be raised. That's just screening on the roof
Okay,
to screen the
okay,
rooftop elements.
And the parking count, it seems there's a lot of parking stalls there. Is that what meets the code or the requirement of the code?
It is the requirement based upon square footage, so we require 1 per 200 square feet of gross leasable area.
Okay. Looks good.
Thank you. I'd like to thank you for choosing to build here. It's great.
Thank you.
This is a beautiful park, and it's nice to see it completed, and those are beautiful buildings. So, thank you very much. And so,
I move to approve.
subject to staff comments, including waivers for parking?
Yes.
Okay, I'll second that. Any other discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Your building site plan and CSM are approved.
Thank you.
Thank
Well
you.
done, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for clarifying that for me.
Good job, Jim.
Next item is the Woods at Highland Park. The applicant is seeking development agreement amendment, building plan, and landscape plan approval for the property located at 12431 North Green Bay Road and the parcel immediately to the west, 12424 North Green Bay Road and 5555 West Highland Drive for the Woods at Highland Park. And the first thing we need to do is remove this from the table.
Make a motion to remove from table?
Somebody second. I'll
Second.
it.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 This item is now before us.
So as you may recall, the applicant was in front of us at our last meeting, and this is one of the items that was tabled due to some discussion items that still had to be worked out with staff. We also added the landscaping plan and the concept plan as part of this approval. In terms of the concept plan, the applicant has submitted 3 different designs for the properties. I'm just kind of going to scroll through them on the screen for you so you can kind of get a look at them. They all include a brick or stone element, and they all have a little bit different architectural elements with them that kind of break up the design. Staff has reviewed the plans, and we're supportive of the different designs that are showing. One of the conditions, because we have less or more than 50% of the garage doors facing the street, we asked for a little bit more upscale garage door, which looks like he has complied with. So staff is supportive of the design. The only condition we placed in there is that no more than 50% of the buildings could be of one design. In terms of the development agreement, one of the items that was somewhat of a sticking point was the issue of how many model homes could be constructed, spec homes. We typically, this type of development would allow for 2. The applicant was requesting 3. And the reason for, and I have the screen up on the map here, this is the city property that is part of this development, and there is some environmental contamination that needs to be cleaned up, and that would involve excavation, so the applicant would like to excavate the basements and then replace it all with clean fill, so that would require the buildings to be done at the same time. Without doing all 3, he would not be able to get clear title on the property, which would make it very difficult to sell. So from that aspect, we're supportive of it. I believe there's also some other minor issues that he'd like to go over with regard to development agreement, which Bridget can handle in a minute. The other issue on the table was the landscaping plan. I think we added a rendering up on the screen for you of the proposal. Wasn't in front of our landscape architect. The only condition we had asked for is the street tree requirement to be met on Green Bay Road. Now, Green Bay Road in this area is kind of a transition from Thiensville to the rural area, so we're not looking for a soldiers in a row type treatment, but we still want the quantity per the code, and we can work with the applicant to kind of stagger those and cluster them to give it a more natural appearance. The only other issue with the landscaping plan, I know the applicant has been working with the neighbor, Mr. Wilkie, with regard to that screening. I haven't heard anything on that status, but I assume they're working it out. This will be going to council, I believe, this next coming meeting for final approval on the rezoning, the CSM, the development agreement, if we can get to a conclusion on that. So this should all be wrapping up fairly shortly. So with that, I guess I'll leave the discussion to Bridget and David with regard to some of the kind of other items in the development agreement. Thank you.
So I'm happy to report that there are no other items in the development agreement unless you have any. Bridget and I reached terms here last week, and I think we're in good shape.
Well, that's great to hear.
Okay. And of course, she's been great to work with. Bridget, you've been great to work with.
Thanks, Dave.
All right, we're good to work with too, aren't we?
Well, we'll see. Am I getting approval?
Well, I'll move approval of the development agreement, the landscape plan, and the building plan.
For staff recommendations?
Yes. Yes, exactly.
You help me, I'm helping you. I'll second it.
I did have one comment. I don't want to jinx anything here.
Uh-oh.
So I have not brought up to Bridget, and I don't want to Shanghai you here. There is a requirement for XL decel on bypass lane on Green Bay Road, which I totally get. The bypass lane is on the other side of the road. That's on the east side of the road, and that would be going up against the property owner who I'm buying a little piece of property from. His name is Fred Bursch. And Fred said, look, I would really prefer not to have a bypass lane in front of my property. He's going to build a house there for, I think, a family member. So he requested, and so I'm transferring the request, and I'm fine with this request, that we do just the XL decel, but not do the bypass lane on the other side of the road from the development, if it's okay with you.
I will amend my motion to waive the bypass lane.
I want to hear staff's opinion, but I'm close to a second.
So similar opinion as the other site we had just talked about, that the purpose of the bypass lane is really traffic safety and a way for traffic to go around cars that are turning left into this development. So if you don't have a bypass lane along that edge, you may have cars that are backing up into Thiensville.
What's the current speed limit there? It was like 30, isn't it?
I think it's 35 there.
25
So
to
it goes from
35?
25 to 35 along that stretch.
And up to 45 as you go further.
Right.
It's not 45, I know. I wish it was.
It switches a little bit further north.
Yeah, it's not a high-speed highway. In fact, you know, if you're coming out of Thiensville, you're going past all sorts of neighborhood streets that don't have bypass lanes.
I'll agree to the second.
Okay.
I'll second that.
Thank you very much. You want to be nice to Fred.
Yes, I do.
Yeah, any other comments? All those
See how
in-
agreeable we are?
All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion passes.
Good job.
It's great working with you. Thank you so much.
You've done a lot of work on this. We're really
Yeah.
pleased to see where this is right now.
Great.
Thank you for your time.
Very
Well,
attractive.
It's your support, and I really appreciate it. Thank you.
No, you did it. You're doing a beautiful job.
Thank you.
All right.
How do I can I get to it or no?
I guess you might as well stay sitting there, huh? The Hoff Group for Dave Schoenecker. The applicant is seeking rezoning recommendation from B3 office to R6 residential plex to allow for 6 condominiums for the properties located at 10950 and 10922 North Cedarbrook Road, the Riverway condominium. First item is remove this from the table.
So moved?
Second.
Motion and second to remove from the table. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, it's now before us.
Some of you may recall, this was in front of us back in January of this year, where the item was tabled. This is a request to rezone a portion of the land from B3 to R6. So this is the current zoning I have up on the screen. It's B3 in this area here, and the request is to basically, and I'll get to that in a moment, split this so that the bottom half remains B3, the top half is in R6, and there's a PUD overlay over the entire parcel. The applicant is proposing to condominium the development because it does not meet the lot width requirements for either of the zoning districts. There was a number of concerns what we had last time when this was in front of us. One of them was the wetlands. There was a request to fill .046 of the wetlands. That's been approved by the DNR at this point, so that's been addressed. There's also a portion of the lot that's going to have to be filled in order to get out of the 100-year floodplain. The applicant has started the C-LOMAR process, which is a conditional letter of map revision based on fill. Basically, it goes to FEMA, and they conditionally approve it, and then once the fill is actually in place, then he gets his final LOMAR requirement. The DNR has a requirement in the flood fringe that you cannot raise the flood elevation by any development by 1/100 of a foot. I was actually just at a meeting with representatives from the county, and the DNR has basically come out and stated that if you filled every flood fringe area in the whole county of Mquon, you would not raise the flood elevation by 1/100 of a foot. So they've kind of taken a less aggressive approach on filling within that 100-year floodplain. And again, most developments are going to have no problem complying with that 1/100 of a foot requirement, including this one. So that's been taken a little bit further along in the process. The fire chief has a letter signed stating that the dry land access will be provided. There is a portion outside the property that does not comply with the 100-year floodplain, so that the applicant will have to get a letter, which he did, that states that the chief will be able to get there during a flood event with a wheeled access. We also talked about last time, there is one specimen tree on the site that will have to be removed just because of the amount of fill. There's no way we could save it regardless of design. In terms of the concept plan, that's been tweaked a little bit as well. The applicant still does not comply with a number of our requirements. There's a 20-foot side yard offset, which he does not comply with, as well as a 30-foot rear yard offset and a 30% lot coverage requirement. Basically, the property line is right here, and you can see there's a retaining wall on the property line. The building is shown 15 feet off that side, and then there's also a building tight to this outlot, which is roughly about 8 feet. This is all open space outlot area. There's no development or anything around this area, so those reduction in the setback will not have an impact. There's been an emails back and forth between Mr. Hoff and the owners of the Riverwalk Highlands, and they're supportive of the project as long as they have a full understanding of how this will work in relation to their property. And there was a concern over some shared access maintenance agreement with regard to that road and how construction is going to impact that road. But he did send me an email saying that he's supportive and does not object to the project. The other issue which they do not comply with is the 30% lot coverage requirement. This is one of those situations where you have the B3 and the R6 have two totally different requirements. The B3 says you have to have an open space of at least 30% for an existing building. This does comply with that. The R6 says you can't have more than 30% impervious surfaces on the property. The R6 portion does not comply with that. So if you take the overall between both of those and put a lot coverage on, it's roughly 43%. So it doesn't comply with the R6 requirement, but if this entire property remained as B3, the whole site would only have to provide the 30% open space requirement. So in theory, there would actually be more developable area than under the current situation. Hopefully that all makes sense to everybody. So we're supportive of the new layout, and we're supportive of taking this through the process. We do want that CLOMAR approval done prior to council action on that, on the rezoning, just to make sure that we're on the same page and that FEMA is okay with everything with that. But other than that, we do recommend approval according to the conditions in the report. Thank you.
Mr. Hoff, anything you want to add?
No, as usual, Jack pretty much covered it all, but I'm available for questions.
We have a member of the audience who wishes to speak. Mr. Schneider.
Something that hasn't come up is I live directly across the street, I wasn't opposed when they built the current development that's there now. I wish I would have been back when it was developed. The amount of emergency services that go to that property is astronomical. I'll get some exact details of how many calls actually go there, but from Thanksgiving to New Year's, it's ridiculous, the amount of calls that happen there. And from talking to the fire chief, it's mostly, transports, assists where they're coming and helping people up, things like that. But the calls are very numerous, very loud, and adding 6 more units back there, I don't know that that's something that the neighbors would like. I know they're not happy with how many emergency calls come already, so I just wanted to throw that out there.
Okay, but this is a different type of residential development. This is condominiums for anybody, and the Highlands is for senior citizens. So that's a difference. And you've probably been back there and seen the building that's there. It could star in a haunted horror movie. And as far as open space goes, it's surrounded by swampland, so there's plenty of plenty of open space. And there is a trail system back there, which I swear nobody walks on, because they're all falling down and going to the hospital. But and I don't mean that in a bad way. But I think what you're doing there is you're filling in something with something that's really high quality, and I appreciate your efforts.
Great, thank you.
Any other comments?
I'd move approval per staff recommendations.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve. Again, are there any other comments? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Congratulations.
Great, thanks again. You're really good to work with tonight, especially. Thank you.
Thanks for
He
complimenting us.
never says that before the vote.
Item D, we already took care of, so we go on to item E, Boulder Venture for Associated Bank. The applicant is seeking rezoning recommendation from B2 to B2 PUD and concept plan approval for two proposed developments to allow a financial institution and a fast food restaurant to share access, parking, stormwater management, and green space for the properties at 11223 and 11249 North Port Washington Road.
So the property at 11249 North Port Washington Road is currently occupied by Associated Bank, which was formerly Bank Mutual. And the property south of that at 11223 North Port Washington Road is vacant. Both properties are owned by Associated Bank, and an additional .08 acre also owned by Associated Bank will be included in the PUD. It's kind of this flagship parcel which extends to Mquon Road. You can't really see it on here, but that's included and counted in the PUD. The current zoning of the properties is B2. As phase one of the project, the applicant is proposing to develop a new two-story facility for Associated Bank on the south lot, which is vacant, while the current Associated Bank remains in operation. And once the relocation happens, the existing Bank Mutual Associated Bank building will be demolished, and a new 6,800 square foot building will be constructed as part of phase two. The proposed user for this new north building is expected to be a fast food user, but the applicant has not identified a specific user. And restaurants are a conditional use in the B2 district. Again, in your report lays out the factors to consider when analyzing a rezoning request. The land use map plan designates the site as community commercial. Other land use designations in the area include office, community commercial, and neighborhood commercial. Staff believes the rezoning to a PUD will provide a greater opportunity for the vacant parcel to the south to develop under the shared access, parking, and the shared open space. The zoning to the PUD allows for deviations from the code for the development while also achieving a comprehensive planned site. Currently, the vacant lot does not meet the lot requirements of the B2 district, which makes developing the vacant parcel more difficult. The area does remain a mix of office and retail uses, and the rezoning will not change the character of the area. The concept plan, as shown on the screen, shows a total of 2 buildings on the proposed 2.66 acre site. They show the buildings proposed in adjacent to, in line with adjacent building setbacks. The building to the south is a little closer to Port Washington Road to match up with the existing PNC building on the corner. And then this building to the north for the fast food user is set back at a distance similar to the Starbucks development to the north. Staff has preferred or has addressed, staff prefers for the building to the south, Associated Bank building to be flipped so that the long side of the building faces Port Washington Road and the drive-through is in the rear. The applicant has indicated that flipping the building is not possible or is a non-starter due to operational floor plan layouts concerns. Staff also on Phase 2 has concerns with potential conflict areas. So the entry point here with the front row parking, there's also dead end row parking for this north parking lot, and just overall site and drive-through circulation concerns. The site plan or the concept plan shows a 32% open space ratio for both phases of the development, which fails to meet the 40% code requirement. That would require a waiver from the Planning Commission. And the commission has approved a reduction in the open space ratio for redevelopments in the past. Typically, these have been on lots that are non-conforming. The proposed development, once combined, actually would meet the lot size requirements of the B2 district. And they are asking for a waiver to the open space to accommodate more parking for the Phase 2 user. They have indicated that in order to meet the 40% open space, they would have to eliminate approximately 27 parking stalls, including the drive aisle. But staff feels that there are opportunities to increase the open space for the development. The proposed concept plan does meet the FAR for the development, which is a 30% requirement. Again, for access, you are seeing a main access off Port Washington Road. This is an existing access point. Staff has concerns with this access, which will generate more traffic for the development, and then with the development across the street, which is the Walgreens and the McDonald's. There is an existing right-out only drive access on the vacant parcel to the south. The concept plan shows this drive eliminated. A second driveway may alleviate some of the traffic concerns from staff. If the southern driveway is proposed and recommended, then PNC Bank would be required to eliminate their existing drive access, which is a condition of their conditional use grant approval. They were required to eliminate this driveway if the property to the north developed. So while staff is supportive of the PUD, we have concerns with the general concept plan, including the layout of the bank building, which the applicant has indicated is not feasible from their perspective. We do have an issue with the open space ratio and then overall the site access and circulation. So we're looking really here to hear the commissioner's feedback, both for staff and the applicant. And we believe that there is an opportunity to just create greater cohesive development between these two sites. And we are recommending to table the rezoning request and the concept plan.
Thank you, Papula. We'll go to the applicant and introduce yourselves.
Hi, good evening. My name is Robert Schmidt with Boulder Venture, and I'm joined by Andrew Kerr of Rinka Chung Architects, who represents Associated Bank, and Kurt Smith from Boulder Venture. And I want to thank Papula. We've talked several times on the phone. We've never met in person, so it's nice to meet you in person. I would say that to start off, obviously this project is being led by Associated Bank. They purchased Bank Mutual, so they now own that property. We are developing the new branch for them, and it's a phased project. So the existing Bank Mutual will remain existing until Associated Bank can move into the new facility. So the fact that it's being led by Associated Bank, the current owner, it's imperative that we get it to work for them. I would stress to you that the retail development concept plan for the north half of the site is very conceptual at this point. And I think we're probably guilty of getting stuck in the weeds of trying to put too much detail into a plan that is probably at least a year off, and we would be coming back at a later point to look at those details. It could end up being different types of uses for that facility. But as it relates, so I think what we have to do tonight is probably focus mostly on the orientation of the bank, the site circulation, which we agree is important, and we're open to the suggestions of staff on trying to improve site circulation, and also talk a little bit about the green space ratio. To talk about the orientation of the bank itself, I'm going to turn it over to Andrew Kerr to just give you a little information on how the bank operates and how it's set up.
Good evening. Thank you for your time this evening.
The internal program of the bank has certain adjacencies that we need to maintain. The drive-through side of the bank, which in this case would be the left-hand side of the building as shown, ends up being sort of the money side of the bank, if you will, where the tellers are working, where the safes are located. All the teller functions end up being on one or on 2/3 of the bank. On this plan, it would be the left-hand 2/3. And then on the right-hand side, there's a bar of offices for personal bankers, investment bankers, mortgage loan originators, those type of individuals. There's a couple of operational challenges with this site. If we were to push it back, there's really only one opportunity for us to park the bank for clients that are arriving, and that's along the left-hand side. And in order for us to turn it sideways, we would be forced to push the building further back onto the site than we feel would be advantageous for the bank's operations. And additionally, it would complicate the layout of the site overall quite a bit. It would start to impact the ability of the Phase 2 site and its feasibility and Boulder Ventures' ability to put an appropriate-sized building on the site. If you're familiar with this corner at all, the PNC is a pretty large building. It's hard on the corner. This proposed bank that we are looking to build here in Mquon would be a flagship branch. Honestly, I think the last one was a flagship of this size was probably built 5 or 6 years ago. So Associated Bank is definitely committed to the Mquon market and is looking to grow their footprint here in Mquon. So the location of those two branches, the PNC, which again is hard on the corner on the left-hand side, and then the 2-story volume of the Associated Bank, oriented as you see it currently on the site, creates a pretty narrow view corridor to where the drive-through canopy would be located. Additionally, there's a row of landscaping that would be between the two properties. Obviously, we're not at a level now where we're showing a landscaping plan, but I think what you end up with is a paved area. The drive-through canopy is about 24 feet long. That would be pretty well concealed and held back from the streetscape. I don't think as you are proceeding southbound or northbound on Port Washington Road that you would have a significant view corridor to see that drive-through apart from when you are directly opposite. You'd have to turn and look 90 degrees from your direction of travel to really see the canopy, and then only for a few seconds. So those are the operational concerns that the bank has with the site. And turn it back over to you.
I don't know if it was mentioned previously, but this is planned to be a two-story bank branch building. So our thought is that the massing of that building combined with the massing of the PNC next door will really sort of draw the eye away from the drive-throughs towards the back of the building. As it relates to site circulation, we're open to exploring opening up that driveway to the south for right in, right out traffic, as well as aligning the entrance of the main entrance across from directly across from the median, if that doesn't quite line up currently. I guess I would close our comments by saying that what we'd like to do is try to move forward with our PUD while we develop the final details for the PNC Bank branch, for the Associated Bank branch. And then, as we said, once we have uses for the building on the north half, which would be phased into 2019 and 2020, we'd come back with a detailed site and plan for that building at that time. So that's our request, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Concerning the bank building, if the Phase 1 bank building, if that piece of property moved farther north, you could turn the building, right? If if you had more land available to you.
Yes, to a certain extent, that would be true, but we have to keep the bank mutual operational.
Right.
The federal government won't let us shut down that branch while we're building a new one.
That would be in the way?
Yeah, so we're a little stuck with that. We have to build the new one while the existing Associated Bank remains operational. There's literally, it would be, the bank would be fined if we closed the bank. If we demolished one building and started building the other one, it's not allowed.
So you're saying you have to build it on that orientation because the existing bank would be in the way?
Well, that's part of the issue. The other issue, though, is that if we're to rotate that bank, everything has to rotate with it, including the parking for customers. And what that ends up doing is pushing the bank very, very deeply into the site, and it makes it. We lose a lot of the parking that's on the back side of the site. Because we can't really have traffic going counterflow against the drive-through. That all becomes a one-way operation, and so we're left with only a small sliver of parking at the back of the site, and the building is pushed, 60 feet back from the current location. So operationally, that from the bank's perspective is not ideal, particularly given PNC's location next door and the large massing of that building. If Associated Bank were pushed that far back on the site, it would be very difficult to see them from northbound traffic.
Commissioner Stelzner?
I'm supportive of staff recommendations on green space. I really don't want to see, PNC was, after it was built, a lot of people objected to the size of the building and how close it was to the street. Now you're asking to be close to the street as well and have an exposed drive-through. I, as a commissioner and a resident in Mquon, with this being our gateway, struggle with that. I'd really like the drive-through area to be to the rear of the building. The one thing that I do like about the PNC Bank is you really can't see the drive-through. Now they got the glass corridor with the stairwell and the copy machine was in there, and that was poorly planned. But I'd like to make sure that whatever we do with your parcel or allow you to do with your parcel is going to be fitting for really the first impression of Mquon as you come off. I like the fact that it's a flagship location. I like the fact that you're willing to invest to improve the site. I think the existing building, it's been there a long time. It's been there since I was a kid.
Yeah, it's a small little colonial home.
Yep, it was between that and I think First Bank when back in the late 70s or 70s when I opened my account, allegedly. But there's an awful lot of waivers that are being asked for here, and I'm struggling with the waivers just from a traffic flow standpoint. We had the DOT review come through when they were talking about the I-43 expansion. If we didn't give them an option to consider a Highland Road interchange, that whole intersection was going to, I think, four lanes? I mean, it was expanding to the point where it was going to encroach on all the properties there, and the egress in and out of your location as well as the PNC Bank location would have crippled both of those sites. So we tried to be, foresightful there, but I just don't want something too crowded here that is, you're trying to put too much into it based on what we're seeing, and that's why I think the tabling is a good thing, and Jack's standing, so he's got something to offer.
Just a couple of things that, just in fairness to the applicant, the request to have those buildings somewhat closer came from staff. You have the PNC building, which is relatively close, and then on the opposite side of the Bank Mutual, you have the Starbucks building, which also is relatively close. So we tried to keep a line between those that are somewhat staggered back to be, somewhat proportional as you went down the street. If you meant the requirements of the B2 district, those buildings would be both shoved very far back, and I don't know if that's going to be the best look in this stretch either. A couple other things I'll just make a comment on. Number one, the request for the green space waiver, this is somewhat of an unusual circumstance because both of these properties right now individually don't meet the minimum requirement of the B2. So if they were developed individually, you might be in a position where you might give a waiver to some extent to the green space ratio. But when you combine them into one, now they do meet it. And so they're still asking for the waiver, but you have to also think, if they didn't combine it, what would that ultimate green space be for those properties? And I don't really know the answer to that, but I just want you to kind of think about that as far as the process goes. A couple things that would help us in terms of working further with the applicant would be is the drive-through. I know they mentioned they prefer not to have it. You know, I've met with them early on and said I think that might be an issue. Again, I think we still feel that we would prefer it with the drive-through to the rear. That's one of the issues I think you guys want to maybe weigh in on, whether that's a major point or not. Number two.
Something important to me, that's for sure.
The number two would be this issue of access. You know, when we met, we felt it would be great to consolidate access off to the intersection where we would typically like to see it. In this drawing, it basically provides almost a frontage road, which is not the kind of look we're going for. We like to see the connectivity, but not necessarily a frontage road. The other option would be to provide that access to that neighboring parcel, a second access. But then again, that's going to probably invoke some concern from the owner of the PNC property, and they'll have to modify their driveway. And just, I don't know how many of you were here at the time, but the reason that was done was we anticipated this development, or this property to be developed in the future, and though that intersection is too close to the corner, but that's as far back as we could push it, and that's one of the reasons why PNC is on that corner, to keep those driveways as far as possible. So I think it would be beneficial for, I think, staff and the applicant to weigh in maybe on what your vision is in terms of how many driveways, location, and then the orientation of the bank, and then if there's any appetite for somewhat of a modification to that green space ratio. And once we get those answers, I think we can start working on refining the plan.
What happened, so, first question is, how far off the road is this building? How far is PNC, and how far is the Starbucks building?
The Starbucks building, I think, is roughly about 22, 23 feet. The PNC building is within, I think, 3 or 4 feet, if I remember correctly. These buildings, this one, the proposed bank is set back a little bit further than PNC, and then the proposed concept building is roughly in line, I think, with the Starbucks building, maybe a little further back. And we can deviate that line a little bit. I don't want to work on, go too far back, but we can kind of play with that a little bit. I just don't think we'd want to see it. Our typical requirement, if you have parking in front, is a 95-foot setback for the building. And I don't think we want to push it that far back with those buildings adjacent to it.
I'd like to see some greenery up there. I mean, it's just, the PNC is too close to the corner, but I know why it's there. I mean, I know that corner was crippled with the way that site was, with Freddy's back in the day when Freddy's was there, and people just
There was a
couldn't.
2-lane road, and there was no issues with the intersection. Now, with that major intersection there, it was kind of, we had no choice.
So does PNC lose an entrance? Is that
They
what
would lose that entrance off of Port Washington Road. They show it at the time, and then again, years go by, and I think people forget that building's been sold, but the intent was that driveway goes away, and then they would make a curb cut, or when this curb cut was developed, there'd be a shared access point going down and around to get to this access point. Now, again, the commission would have the ability to say we're not going to take their access away, but then you have an issue of the county has a separation requirement from driveway to the driveway, which I believe is 70, if I remember correctly, 70 feet separation. So then we'd have to look at whether we could even get 3 driveways in there and meet their requirements as well. And they have sign off on this as well, so they'll be involved in this process.
I just don't want to see one property devalued or crippled because another property's going in.
Right. And there is some precedence for this. I'm pretty sure none of you, well, the mayor might have been here at the time, but when the Golden Oak Dental went in, they had their own individual driveway off of Port Washington Road, and when the Kohler Credit Union went in, they had to abandon that drive, and they didn't really want to do that, but that was because the intersection where the Venture Court was there, and it wasn't really a safe place where they were, and now we funnel everybody out at that intersection. So we have done it in the past,
To piggyback on something you said, Ed, about the DOT, I think, we're the planning commission, so I think we should think a little bit about the future. And you're correct that they wanted to build an interchange at Highland Road, and if we didn't build the interchange at Highland Road, they would widen Port and Mquon Road intersection, adding, I believe, a lane in each direction, and I asked Kristen, but she wasn't at work today, if we still had a copy of that plan and what that would look like, because people are going to be losing property. Mobile, McDonald's, PNC might, I mean, they don't have much land to give up. And so you're going to have a wider roadway. I'm pretty sure the median goes away. So the median cut will go away. So I would assume anything along Port Road between Mquon Road and Mquon Lawn Garden is going to be right in, right out. So whatever kind of business you want to operate there along that stretch of roadway is ultimately going to be right in, right out. So the idea that you're going to have a fast food restaurant going out in through a median cut opposite another fast food restaurant is patently absurd from a traffic standpoint, I think. And that goes back to the fact that they were supposed to be building this interchange and this freeway, and it's not even on their plans anymore. They're broke. They can't do this. So they may come back and try and widen the intersection. But even if they don't, what it means is the intersection is going to get busier and busier and busier. And traffic and access to your site is going to be an issue that you have to think about. So I would not count on that median cut being there for the rest of our lives as it is today. I think the traffic is going to get worse there. So backing your building up from the street would probably be a good idea, because then at least they wouldn't take your building when they widen the road. And a business that has right in, right out, and that can survive. The other comment I would make pertains to phase 2, and I would just go to the citizen survey, our visioning survey, the last one that said approval of fast food restaurants was supported by 17% of the population. So going forward with a fast food restaurant probably will not be approved. So I would
If I could just-
think of a different concept, a different land use that would work better here.
If I could just respond, it actually wasn't proposed as fast food. The term is fast casual, where you sit down, you order, and you sit down at your table, and then your order's called, and it's not really a fast food like you were talking about across the street. But we're really in really preliminary discussions with some people right now, but I think it's too early to label anything as fast food, because that wasn't the concept. I think that was a name that somehow got put onto it.
Well, it's got a drive-through on the plan, and it said fast food, so.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I'll also make the comment that right now, these sites are both B2, and they're both developable on their own, and restaurants, including fast food, are conditional uses in the B2 zoning. So,
I understand that.
yeah, there may be some difficulty in flat out denying it, but we could make some requirements out of that, maybe more difficult to develop. But, and again, it's similar to the subdivision we talked about earlier today. I think there's a benefit of looking at these two parcels together versus on their own. I guess we're just looking for some guidance on how to do that from your perspective.
I think that's good too, and frankly, I think if you had one building that incorporated multiple uses, that might even work better than what you're showing here. But like you said, a conditional use grant can be denied for various reasons, and I think in our case, we probably have those conditions, especially at this intersection. And the other thing is a waiver for the open space. I would never grant a waiver for a fast food restaurant. So that's just my opinion.
With regards to the right in and right out, and that second driveway there to the south, We take no issue with either of those things. Operating the site, the bank site, with a right-in, right-out is, would not present any hardships to the bank. We didn't show that second driveway in there because the proximity to the PNC and understanding that it would necessitate the closing of their drive aisle. We were just trying to be good neighbors, but we're open to the possibility of it.
Yeah, the driveway's probably better off farther north. I would agree with you.
Yeah, I would tend to agree.
Cars back up, then you can't even get out of the driveway.
Right, exactly. And that's another concern, that the stacking, as you're coming out of the, we always think about stacking coming into the drive-through, but in this case, I think we also have to be cognizant of stacking coming out of the drive-through. If you hit that light at the wrong time and, it's Friday at 12:30, you could potentially have the drive-through backed up from the front side.
Mr. Charn?
I understand the financial, the layout of the footprint for the bank, and the fact that the canopy is going to be set back off the face of that. And so from that respect, I guess I don't particularly have an issue with the layout, but it's unfortunate to have this, what appears to be a frontage road running along there, and I don't know how you could not have that. And it would be interesting to see, or at least explore the concept of twisting it, rotating it. The other parcel, I think I begin to understand it now, is that I was thinking fast food, and I'm thinking the footprint is so much larger than the Associated Bank. What in the world is this thing? And the parking layout and the drive aisles, and it's just goofy. So I recognize that will flush out as things develop on that, but that's my comments.
Mr. Parrish?
Yeah, sure. Thanks to the applicant for bringing this forward for concept review. It's certainly a goofy-looking site right now, to be honest, so, I was pleased to see that there'd be some development going on, just with the green space and the buildings aging, and then with all the great development around it. I think we've been kind of waiting for an attractive development, so I guess my initial reaction was that we were on our way there. I know that this is just a concept, so you'll come back and make it even better. So as far as the bank configuration, it doesn't bother me. I'd prefer actually not to have a rectangular shaped site or building. We've been doing that a lot lately, just to try to cram these buildings onto these narrow sites. And if we can do it more forward-facing to the street, I just think it's going to be much more attractive to people walking by than to be looking at the end of a rectangle. So I guess on the right side of the site, I'm not seeing too much that bothers me as it relates to the open space requirement. I think it's just a complicated site to begin with, so I think there's some rationale for granting some waivers on that. It's not like there's all this extra area where we could conserve space. It's just a complicated site to begin with. So I think we can be a little more lenient there. Obviously, my fellow commissioners could have a different opinion on that one. As far as the building on the left, I guess I really dislike the PNC building as well. It's one of the reasons I wanted to be on Planning Commission. So to approve a building right on the road and just kind of double down on that planning style, I guess I'd be very open to pushing this back if it at all was possible. I don't care for buildings right on the road. I know it might affect your parking. I also like the idea of exploring the frontage road layout that Marty came up with. Maybe tweaking that will open up some more space for you guys. Was totally opposed to fast food, but very in support of some sort of restaurant that would kind of be a little higher end than fast food, preferably without a drive-through. And that is, I think, all my concept review. So I was just surprised with all the tabling and just being opposed to everything. I think this is a good start, and we should keep tweaking this year. So.
Need a motion?
I guess.
I just want to reiterate, just where I'd like to see the building lined up is at most as far forward as the Starbucks building. I don't want to see it lined up with the PNC building 2 feet back, for all the reasons we said, with traffic, the fact that intersection may change in the future with DOT, and B, I don't want to double down either. So there's some feedback for staff to work with the applicant as we come forward with something that might work a little bit better for us. And again, I would also agree with the mayor. If it's a fast food restaurant with a drive-through, I'm not granting a waiver. I'm just going to flat out say no to probably just about anything that has a waiver with fast food on open space and things like that. So I'd make a motion to table to give you an opportunity to work through this. I think that your development could be something very nice. I'm really pleased that you're expanding the bank, and it might be a flagship location. But again, once we work through this, I'd look forward to something that we can approve. Just a
Thank you.
motion to table.
Second.
Motion to table. Have a second? Any further discussion? I guess we can't have any. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, this item has been tabled.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Item F, Gregory Thompson, the applicant, is seeking building and site approval to allow for a proposed storage unit development for the property located at 5717 West Donges Bay Road in the Donges Bay Corporate Park. The applicant has appealed previous conditions of approval from the April 9th Planning Commission meeting, items 14 and 17, to the City of Mquon Board of Appeals, and the Board of Appeals has remanded the matter back to the Planning Commission.
All right, so I will start this one off. So this particular item went to Board of Appeals in June and again in August. In June, the proceedings were effectively suspended because they subpoenaed the Department of Safety and Professional Services to continue testimony in August. The reason we were even at the Board of Appeals meeting was that the applicant is contesting items number 14 and 17 from the Planning Commission, conditions of approval from April of 2018. Both of those items are standard items from our standard specifications for land development. Item number 14 relates to how the water service is connected to the water main. Essentially, that condition could have been more clear, so that's where our recommendation to clarify that condition comes from. Item number 17 is standard for all developments. Every development that we've seen tonight and every development that comes before you has the condition that the engineering division review in relation to our standard specifications for land development. Not only is that a condition of every site approval that comes before you, it's also in the ordinances. So even if that wasn't listed as a condition of approval, that would still be required, as would the connection to the water main requirements. Essentially, when Board of Appeals was reviewing this process, neither one of those items were contested in front of you. So you weren't made aware that the applicant did not agree with those two conditions. So we're here today to bring that information in front of you so that you are aware of it and that the process can continue to move forward. In the time since the conditions of approval were in place in April, the applicant has provided a set of engineering plans that have been approved by the engineering division. He does have building permits and can start on his site and has started on his site. He has recently applied for his plumbing permits to do the sewer work. He does not have plumbing permit approval yet. There are a few documents that we need before we can process that. So again, the purpose of this being in front of you tonight is so that you have the opportunity to weigh in on the applicant, the various documents the applicant has in favor of him not following the standard specifications. I guess I will leave that as there's a lot of information in this packet. I am sure that the commissioners have many questions and perhaps things that both the engineering division and Jim Voigt with City Water is here tonight as well to answer anything water specific. I would caution the Planning Commission that if we are getting into specific tariff-related items, tariff clarifications, potential conflicts with the tariff, that you do have the opportunity to send this to the Water Utility Commission for their review of specific water items.
Items 14 and 17 don't necessarily have to be in the staff recommendations?
They do not.
They do not. So we could, well, we did approve his development with 14 and 17, but we could have approved it without items 14 and 17, correct?
Correct. So we put those in with each development so that it's clear as to what the applicant needs to do. So they have it all in one document. They don't have to go through the ordinances to find all of their requirements.
And then if he had a dispute later on in the process, it wouldn't involve the Planning Commission.
Correct.
I like that solution. Is that clear?
No. Say it again.
Clear as mud.
Okay. Items 14 and 17 that were recommended, part of the staff recommendations when we approved his project. 17 says you have to follow standard specifications, and 14 explains how he has to hook up the water. That didn't need to be in there because legally didn't need to be in there because he has to follow the standard specifications regardless. And the water connection issue is an issue for the water utility that he would have to address regardless with the water utility, so it's not really a Planning Commission matter. Staff put it in there to be clear, and we approved it, and he appealed it to the Board of Appeals, and they sent it back to us to clarify it, but really, we could just take those two conditions out of our approval, and the dispute would still be there, but the dispute would now be with the water utility.
And the council, correct?
Correct.
Because it's an ordinance, any ordinance waivers go through council.
Well, this would be a waiver of the water utility ordinance. It would go to the water utility.
Which is,
So that's where the messiness starts to come in. The items that the applicant is specifically looking to be changed are all related to the water utility itself. So it would be the Water Utility Commission's purview on whether or not those items could be waived.
And not the common council.
We can't.
The Water Utility Commission is a subset of the council, so it essentially is the council with that hat on.
you get elected to all three.
I get to vote.
May I chime in?
Sure.
Okay. First of all, I got a packet of information that I'm going to more or less read into the record, but I want it attached as part of this record. So this has been a relatively long process, and so the appeal before the Board of Appeals actually stems from the Engineering Department, City Water, and the Plan Commission. So it's inaccurate to label this as some sort of appeal to the Plan Commission conditions. So it's the City Water, it's Engineering, and it's the Plan Commission collectively that made this decision, and that's what I'm appealing. It just so happens through Ms. Hank, when we were negotiating or talking about the water issue, she said that a denial of what I was requesting or proposed couldn't actually happen until the full set of plans, detailed plans, were reviewed, and that doesn't happen at the Plan Commission meeting that we were at. That's conceptual. So I had to submit the plans. So, and I sent an email to Ms. Hank, And she said that even at the staff level, there wasn't a denial, and that was after the Plan Commission meeting. So at the Plan Commission meeting, it seemed futile to even address it, because there was a lengthy discussion. There's 10 pages of emails and back and forth prior to that meeting. And I didn't seem to be getting anywhere I had an approved plan from the Department of Safety and Professional Services that said I could tap a 2-inch water main, run in a private water main, and then service the buildings on my property. And they just disavowed it and said, well, you can't do that. And so I called the state and asked them, I said, well, can they do that? And they wrote back in an email, and I had the section chief of the Department of Safety and Professional Services email saying that the city or municipality does not have the right to dictate the size of a private water main. And so I shared that with them right after they did their full detailed plan review, which of course denied it. And then I submitted it within days after, and I said, well, this is what the state says. Would you reconsider? And so it's not necessarily the Plan Commission's process that I'm appealing, but there was no appeal process described to me. There is no Water Commission utility appeal process anywhere in the ordinances or in the statutes. And I asked repeatedly. I actually asked on April 16th for the appeal procedures in case this didn't work out. Then again on May 7th when I responded to the city denial. Then again I addressed Kimberly Tollefson in an email on May 16th. And then again on May 21st I asked again for the appeal process to the Water Commission. Apparently there was one. And finally, and so I was running out of time, and the only appeal process that's of record in the ordinances is through the Board of Appeals, and that process was very clear. So I applied to the Board of Appeals for, actually the basis of the appeal in my write-up was, it's the city engineering, it's city water, and the Plan Commission collectively. So I don't know who's making the decision. I mean, they recommend to you, and then you approve these conditions, but they actually made the decision, and so I didn't know what to do. So I filed the appeal on May 9th, and I didn't have an appeal process in front of me. So I had to do that. So on the 23rd, Ms. Tollefson sent an email indicating that although I had already secured my appeal through the Board of Appeals, the city attorney said that I could appeal the tariff matter to the Water Utility Commission, but what lacked was any specific procedure. They just said, write a letter to Kristen and tell them that you want to appeal. And, you know, I just responded saying that that appeal process doesn't really meet the typical requirements of an appeal. There's no ordinances or statutes that support it. It would technically start a separate appeal for the same issue, and that any other process would upset the current Board of Appeal that I had going. So that's kind of how that all started.
Did you send a letter to Kristen?
No, I did not, because I was already, like I said, I responded to...
You were given a process and you didn't follow the process. I guess...
No, that's
Okay.
not true.
As a commissioner and as an alderman, I got a 200-page disposition with attorney time and everything else. We have some city standards that are, you know, in the list of ordinances, and I respect your frustration. I respect the fact that you want to do something one way maybe versus another, and maybe the communication could have been a little clearer with staff as to how to work through it. However, you were given a site plan approval with conditions that you agreed to, and you started building your property. And since then, I mean, just even the time that the commission has spent going through this, in addition to like all of the city attorney contact time and everything else, your premise, what is your premise for appealing this in the first place? Financial hardship? Is, you know, it was financially burdensome is one of the first items that I read. Is that your premise for appealing it, or you just don't want to follow the process the city's got set forth for you?
No, I very much want to follow the process, and I am following the process. But if
Okay.
a person is aggrieved by a decision or a determination made by a board, any kind of officer, anything, there's a right to appeal. And so that process is in the ordinances, and that's what I'm doing. I'm doing that exactly, because I don't feel that they had the authority to overrule the Department of Safety and Professional Services. And that's been in through the testimony on record. That is for sure the fact, that you cannot supersede their codes. And they do allow a 2-inch water main, and they do allow exactly what I proposed. And there's nothing in the tariff that indicates otherwise, that it supersedes it. And so that's I'm just saying that's the way it works. And then also, this matter does have impact because I'm looking at doing phase 2, and the city knows that. And so that what I do now, if I put in more buildings or whatever, I can use that 2-inch main and tap off that, whereas if I come back for phase 2 or whatever in addition, then I'd have to tap however many more. I'd have to cross the wetland again, and there's a whole host of course, financial reasons, for sure. But I'm not sidestepping anything. This is the process.
Yeah, but I think the argument here is not one for the Planning Commission to decide. It's if it's you or the Department of Professional Services versus our water utility, it doesn't involve the Planning Commission. It's just so happened the Planning Commission had a list of staff recommendations, which included the regulations for the water utility, and we approved those, and now we've had this huge mess and all this paperwork. So I think staff's recommendation is correct here, that, or we could even simplify it, we could just take those 2 recommendations out of our original approval.
Do we need to,
And
or
be
do we
done,
just refer to the?
because we're not in a position to change tariffs of the water utility, and we're not going to fight with the Department of Professional Services because that's not our job.
We're not changing the tariff. Well, all we're doing is if somebody interprets an ordinance or interprets a tariff or interprets some sort of code, it's that person that's making that interpretation that we're questioning. Is it an error in the interpretation? I'm not changing the codes. I'm not changing the tariff. It's very clear in the tariff.
Well, you're questioning the codes, and that's not for the Planning Commission to determine.
Okay, but where
We
we
don't
are
have the
now,
authority to do that. We can't overrule what the city water utility tells us is the code, whether that code is right or wrong. So I think what we're suggesting here is the Planning Commission punt this issue and take it off of our recommendations, and then the disagreement that you have, and I sympathize with your situation, okay? But the process would be to address that issue with the water utility. And we don't need to do that here tonight because there's nothing we can do about it.
okay, let me just backtrack. So if the city water utility has already made a decision, and then I appealed that, and again, the appeal was collective. It was city water, it was engineering, it was the body that made the decision. And the Plan Commission was included in that because it did have a condition on there. So what I'm saying is even if you bow out, it's the city water utility is still in there, and the appeal process needs to continue. So if it's on a remand, it has to go back. So if you bow out of it, it still has to go back to the Board of Appeals. I'm already in the process. I'm already in.
Yeah.
I've
Well,
appealed their decision.
I don't know where it goes.
Why
I
did the
think it
Board
would
of
be simpler to go to the water utility, but I don't know where it goes.
Well,
And
again,
it's-
on an appeal, I've already went to the water utility, and so on an appeal, it has to be a different decision-making body, and that's why there's
It's
the
the
Board of
Water
Appeals.
Utility Commission, not the city water utility.
You met with the city water and the people that are in charge of running the city water, but the Water Utility Commission is essentially a subset of the Common Council. And we have applicants come forward before and ask for a waiver with a reason, And that would, A, get reviewed by the city attorney. We also have an attorney on council that would also be very thoroughly reviewing that, and you'd have a direct answer. This body doesn't have the ability to change an ordinance, whether it be a water utility ordinance or a common council city ordinance. All we do is we make a recommendation to the council or the water utility from here. So we can't, I don't agree with the mayor, unfortunately, on this one, where we should remove any conditions because they match our ordinance. I would just leave them in place. I would make a motion to recommend the water utility to review this. Therefore, you've got a recommendation from a governing body, which takes you a little bit out of the process and speeds it forward for you, to the governing body that made the ordinance to review this and make a decision on it.
And who is that? Who's the governing body that made the
The Water
ordinance?
Utility Commission, which is a subset of a common council.
Okay.
Not the person running the water utility for the city. It's the governing body who made the ordinance. You're arguing the point in the packet that there's a different governing body on a state level that is disagreeing with the way that our ordinance is written. So my recommendation with a second and approval to refer to the Water Utility Commission would accomplish your goals for you. It would, A, make sure that, the ordinance is reviewed as far as, being there and being accurate, and B, would give you firm direction on, whether that's something that would be allowable or not. It would save you the chase around. It's the direct answer to the ordinance. The ordinance is the argument in question. You're disagreeing with the way the ordinance is written. Staff recommendations came forward based on the ordinance. It's just kind of a repeat and a polite reminder that you got to follow these items. So the Water Utility Commission will review that and give you the feedback based on it.
There's just no connection between the Water Utility Commission and an appeal process.
What are you worried about the appeal process? It's being reviewed as you request. What do you need to happen in the appeal process?
There has to be standards, there has to be a procedure. You just can't just, who are the people, what's the standard of review, what do you have to submit, what are the deadlines, there's all kinds of things.
Is it my understanding, Bridget, that he won't really have to submit anything else? That a recommendation to the water utility is going to get him his appealed answer? You're going right to the top?
And so if I don't like that decision, then I go to the, where?
Can you appeal the Water Utility Commission decision to the Board of Appeals?
And where does that stand?
Can you?
I would assume you can appeal any Board of Commission's authority, and it goes to Board of Appeals, and if you lose that Board of Appeals, you would go to Circuit Court of Ozaki County if you wanted.
Well, there you go.
I'm already in the Board of Appeals.
Well, they sent it back to us.
Correct, so
But
it
we're
would-
not the right body to fix it.
So I guess then we send it back to the Board of Appeals because
No,
that's-
it goes to the Water Utility Commission. It doesn't
If
go
you
to the
want
Board
to
of
get it
Appeals.
solved, yeah.
You can chase around in circles all you want, or we can send you on a direct path to a decision that's going to be what you're looking for.
I think your role here is the Board of Appeals remanded it back to you so you could hear his objections. You've heard them, and if you want to keep the motion the same as it was, just approve it again, and then your process is done.
Yeah, because we can't solve the problem.
Right, you just heard his.
I could say I agree with you, but I can't waive the rules of the Water Utility Commission.
I'm going to make the motion to approve it as we originally approved.
I second it.
And refer to the Water Utility Commission.
If there's a dispute, it goes to the Water Utility Commission.
I don't think that's our job to tell it where it goes.
Request.
Okay.
We can make a friendly request.
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Well, I think
So
we
are you
already
sending
know
it
where-
back to the Board of Appeals?
No, the Water
You just
Utility
said?
Commission.
You could go back to the Board of Appeals, but if you want to solve the problem, go to the Water Utility Commission.
Write the letter to Kristen like staff had directed you to do so.
In May, you said yourself, I believe, that you were directed to send a letter to Kristen in May by Kim Tollefson. That's 4 months ago. So you actually were given the right answer 4 months ago.
Mr. Mayor, just call the question, please.
A motion and a second to, what was that again?
Approve as we'd originally approved.
Approve the original approval. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay.
Is that it?
Announcements, next meeting, Monday. It's on a Monday.
Finally.
October 8th, at 6 PM.
Move to adjourn.
Motion and second to adjourn. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed?